An initiative of the Greater Des Moines Partnership formed in 2007, the Business Innovation Zone, the BIZ, exists to connect entrepreneurial needs with qualified resources and to provide guided professional and business direction. The BIZ helps entrepreneurs maximize their successes by helping them navigate resources, strengthen knowledge, improve skills, form strategic alliances, and secure proper capitalization. To find out more about the BIZ, visit www.bizci.org.
Some of the changes that Iowa State has made in its tech transfer policies to make it easier for businesses to collaborate and work with universities. So with that,
thank you, David. So when they first asked me to do this, they told me that people were going to pay for lunch. I was like, oh no. We're going to have to pay to come to this. When we give talks on this subject at Iowa State, we offer free lunch, and we're thrilled when we get about 10 people. So I'm a little overwhelmed that this many people came to show up and listen to this. So I'm very appreciative to the Greater Des Moines Partnership and every one of you for taking your time out of your busy day to come learn about engaging with Iowa State. I'm going to give a little bit of background about who we are, talk about what we call our flexible solutions. Those are our different models for engagement. I'm going to point at one of our companies in the audience a couple of times because they've actually worked with some of these new models. And then I want to make sure that you all know about a proof of concept initiative that is organized out of Mike's office, but it's a cost-sharing research opportunity. So we need to make sure we get a little more about that. So who are we? I think most of you met Mike Crum, heard her talk about the new reorganization at Iowa State at all? Yes, no, maybe a few of you. Well, we reorganized about a year ago, and they pulled economic development out of the Vice President for Research office. It was Vice President for Research and Economic Development, and now they've created a Vice President for Research and a Vice President for Economic Development and Business Engagement. And that's headed by Mike Crum, who sat in the front row to be nice to me. And that group is kind of an alphabet soup. We love acronyms at Iowa State. I think everybody does, and everybody has their own set. Here's all the units in EDIR. I won't go over all of them. I'll point out that the two on your left are ISERF, the ISU Research Foundation, and OIPTT, the Office of Intellectual Property and Technology Transfer. Those are the two offices I'm going to talk about today. And it's confusing because there's two of them, but it's really only one group of people. We have about 21 people in our office, and you can't tell who's ISERF and who's OIPTT. OIPTT is the university office, and that was formed back in the 80s because they were concerned that ISERF, which is a separate not-for-profit, they wanted to make sure that the ties to Iowa State were close enough. So they created a kind of a sister office. Personally, I think it just makes it more confusing because who knows which letters are going to come out of somebody's mouth, but that's what it is. So the two offices together, we're a tech transfer organization. And what does that mean? That means we help researchers, we help inventors, and we help industry, and we help them form research partnerships, we help them protect intellectual property, and then we help commercialize those technologies working with industry. We do these things by doing a lot of paperwork. We figure out what contract is the appropriate contract to implement for the situation. We file patents, which also involves a lot of paperwork, and we manage patent applications, and we also license technologies. All of this leads to fulfilling our mission of commercializing technologies for the public good. Now, taken in a narrow sense, commercialization only means patenting and licensing. We try to think of commercialization in the broader sense because all of our research that we do with industry leads to knowledge, it leads to know-how, it leads to some kind of a technology transfer. A very small portion of that actually leads to patenting and licensing. It's just, that's the part that's easy to measure. So that's the part you always hear about, is how many patents have you filed, how many licenses. Because those are easy things to measure, but that know-how, I think, probably trumps in value everything that we could ever do with the patent. If we talk about ISERF for a minute, I think it's a good way to talk about how Iowa State has had an impact on the world. The ISU Research Foundation was formed in 1938. We're the second oldest tech transfer office behind the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, WARF. So we're the second oldest in the country. We achieved financial independence in the mid-90s. There were a string of really successful, impactful technologies. And that's an important milestone for a couple of reasons. One, and the most important, is it shows the impact that Iowa State researchers have had on the world. Because only 16% of the tech transfer offices across the nation are financially independent. 84% are heavily subsidized by their universities to exist. We have to exist. Ever since the Bayh-Dole Act in the 80s, that kind of forced all universities to have a tech transfer office because that was part of their mission to protect those federal technologies and get them out. But our financial independence also raises a lot of questions about, well, since you're financially independent, but most of them aren't, doesn't that mean you charge too much? I'd like to argue we don't. I think there's no one in my office that gets up in the morning and worries about how are we going to pay salary, how are we going to squeeze an extra dollar out of the companies. We want to get a fair return so that our inventors can share in that success. But I think for us, we've been financially independent for so long that it's just part of who we are, and it's more of the attitude that, wow, we have good technologies, we need to work really hard to make sure people have access to them and can share in that success. So we try to be fair. We had our 75th anniversary recently, which was a big milestone. What are some of the accomplishments that Iowa State has had that's made an impact? Every one of you in this room has one of them in your pocket or on your tabletop, your cell phone, your iPad, your computer. The lead-free solder that's in there was developed by the Ames Lab in Iowa State University. 70% of the electronics worldwide contain Iowa State technology inside. I think that's really cool. It's something we should really be proud of. Another one, I think you guys had some fresh fruit in your lunch. Is there any watermelon in there? Is there? Maybe? If there was, it was probably from Iowa State. If you ever eat an oblong seedless watermelon, that was developed, came from an Iowa State breeder. 20% of the worldwide fresh market watermelons can be traced back to Iowa State. Other things, you may have seen HMB Ensure. If you're familiar with the product Ensure, you've seen the commercials on TV. That muscle building formula came from Iowa State. So lots and lots of impactful technologies. Some historical ones that weren't necessarily patented, but again have had a huge impact. There are the digital computer. The round hay bales. You drive around the countryside and see round hay bales. Those were invented at Iowa State. And then B73, any plant people in the audience, that's one of the hell, of course there is, pioneer. That's one of the fathers of hybrid corn. And that was jointly developed by Iowa State and the USDA. So a long history of making impact, and that's what our goal is to keep identifying those opportunities to make meaningful impact. When we work with industry, it's about 10% of our research portfolio. So about 90% of our research money comes from the federal government. About 10% of our research funding comes from industry. The research that we do with industry, as you might expect, tends to be more applied. Probably less often leads to those patents. Less likely to be a lead-free solder or another, really broad-based, impactful thing, because those usually come from basic research. But it's an important part of our portfolio. And as we all know what's happening with the budget with the federal government, we have to be mindful about how are we going to keep funding our research enterprise and making those impacts going forward. So we've been, for the last several years, looking at our policies and saying, what can we do to be more open to working with industry, to address their concerns, to hear what they're saying about why they don't work with us. And we've developed what we call flexible solutions. I'm going to kind of walk through each one of these options and explain it. Now some of this gets kind of dry, I'll admit, because this is that contract stuff. But traditionally when a company works with the university, That Bayh-Dole Act that I mentioned in the 80s, that allows the universities to maintain ownership of the intellectual property that they develop. Now, the Board of Regents, through our patent policy at Iowa State, then tells Iowa State, well, even if your money didn't come from the federal government, if it came from the state or any other source, we want you to treat it consistently with how you treat federal money. So that's our underlying rules that we have to follow. As in general, we have to follow Bayh-Dole. And traditionally, what that means for universities is if you engage in research with us, you get an option to any intellectual property that comes out. Because part of all those rules are things related to you can't value something that hasn't been created yet. So that's a limitation. If you can't value something that's been created, well then we'll give you an option. So when it's been created, then you can engage with us. But we've kind of stretched that a little bit a few years ago, and about half of the universities in the country offer what we do with this traditional option. We go ahead and offer a royalty-free, non-exclusive license. And we do that because the companies are funding the research, and we can understand from your perspective that risk of, I funded the research, and yet you're telling me I can't use the results. It's, that can be a little hard to take. So that royalty-free means, yes, no matter what happens, even if we can't agree across the negotiating table, you always have the right to use that. Now, that said, I don't think we've ever had a situation where industry's funded research and we haven't been able to agree on that commercial license. That's important to us. But that's kind of our baseline position, and that's what every university does. Again, about half of them with the we call it a NERF, non-exclusive royalty-free, more acronyms for you. Then about 3 or 4 years ago, through conversations with industry and an industry advisory council in the College of Engineering, they said that ownership was really something that was important to them, that they felt the companies needed to own the IP. And if they could own the IP, they may be willing to engage in certain kinds of research that they wouldn't otherwise bring to the university, things that are more proprietary in nature. So we were, I believe, the first one in the nation to come up with an official assignment policy that was out there for everybody to see, where under certain circumstances we can allow companies to own the IP. Now you can imagine we have to be careful doing this because of all those federal rules and state rules. We have to make sure that the company has fully funded the research. Has this been hugely popular? Did the floodgates open? No. But it's been a nice little, we probably do 2 or 3 of these a year. And it has opened the door to doing certain kinds of research that companies feel are very proprietary and don't want to take any risk that we may take ownership of that. And I think the example that I give here is a company that had some very proprietary designs for equipment. And they wanted us to use those proprietary designs to see how they could store them. Is I guess a good way to say it. So they had to give us the designs so we could put them into our virtual reality. We mocked up the storage system, and then we're able to show how this equipment could fit into their storage system and work with it. Now, no patents were ever filed on that. And we knew that going in, and the company knew that going in. They still chose to use this solution because those designs were so proprietary that they could not convince their management to let them go unless they were tied up in titanium handcuffs. But we didn't think that really addressed the big problem because we were still hearing under our traditional thing, well, that's a lot of risk. Again, I funded it. I should have an exclusive license to it, and I don't know what that's going to cost me. So that's where we implemented about a year and a half ago what we call, very cleverly, Option B. And that one's intended to manage financial risk. We didn't come up with this one on our own. This one there's several universities across the country that had been looking at things like this, and I think about 3 of them had implemented things. We looked at the 3 that had done that and thought that what Minnesota did looked really attractive. And so the University of Iowa and Iowa State, we both announced and launched this program together to provide consistency across the state for our companies and And again, we just basically followed Minnesota. And what that says is, if you pay an extra 10%, so if your research project costs $150,000, and you pay an extra 10% or $15,000, then if there is any patents that come out of this, we've already pre-negotiated the licensing terms. And those licensing terms are you'll owe 1% royalty if annual sales, net sales, hit 20 million, okay? 1%, is that appropriate for all industry sectors? Probably not, but you know, we couldn't have a policy that had 47 if-thens. So we just, Minnesota came up with this, we agreed with them, you put 1%. If 1% doesn't make sense, we talk about it. We figure it out before we implement the project. So far it's worked because our attitude is we're not trying to charge you for the sale of the whole product. So I use the example of Boeing. If we have something in their airplane, they sell one airplane, they're going to exceed this 20 million cap with one sale. But we didn't provide 20 million of value. We provided a little algorithm that makes something work better in one of their parts that, you know, maybe added $100 worth of value. So we based that 20 million off the incremental value that we have brought through our research. And so we get very creative in how we define net sales. And that's something that we work with the companies on as we implement the research. Has this one been wildly successful? Not really, not yet. We're hoping, we still have hope. Minnesota does about 1/3 of their research agreements under this option. We do about 5%, and probably across the country, the other universities have implemented similar things. It's been about 5%. But I think what it's done, more than switched a lot of people over, is it's opened the conversation. And it's opened the conversation about, is there going to be any IP? And I'm just as likely to talk somebody out of using BNC because I don't want to charge you extra money if you're not going to get something for it at the end. But it opens that conversation. It, I think, makes industry feel more comfortable that we understand their issues and are willing to work with them and find a solution that can work for everybody. Now we also have niche agreements, which I'm sure everybody does, but we've tried to do a better job of cataloging them. And that's where we always try to look for, are there unique ways that we're working with industry that we can put an easy solution in place and make those agreements go quicker. And the best example I always use is field trials. All of the life science companies give us seeds, chemicals, and protocols. And they say, plant it, spray it, and tell me what happens. Okay? Every company does that. And so we went through an exercise of standardizing how we do those field trials with agreements that have the appropriate regulatory language so that we're not starting all over. Same with human clinical trials. A lot of this is based on regulations. You have to have the appropriate regulations in the agreement. So we'll try to get a set of similar type research and implement a solution that helps make that go more quickly. I don't have the data up here, but we started tracking in our contracts group about 1.5 years ago how quickly we were getting things done, because that was another point of contention that we're too slow. We can't move quick enough. So I challenged that group to get 60% of the research agreements done in 30 days or less. And keep in mind that we can hardly get a company, we can't get any company to agree to pay us sooner than 60 days. So they won't cut a check sooner than 60 days, and yet I've challenged my group to get the whole agreement done in 30 days. They didn't like me very well. They thought I was crazy and there's no way they could succeed, and I had to assure them, you're not going to get fired if you don't meet this. But I want you to try. And I'm happy to say it took about 6 months, and we're now in between 65 and 70% of our research agreements that are fully executed in 30 days or less. And I'm really proud of that group. They stepped up to the challenge. There's still some that are problems, of course. There's always unique situations or weird things coming up. We have what we jokingly refer to at Iowa State, meetings of the Office of Weird Stuff. Because almost every week something comes up that we have never encountered before. Somebody wants to work together in a way that we didn't imagine. And those will take more than 30 days. But I think that statistic shows, again, our commitment to trying to work with industry, trying to respond in a way that is appropriate for you. So I don't want to dwell on this slide, but just wanted to show you there's probably 10 universities out there that offer different flexible solutions. This slide only shows 5 of them. I stole this shamelessly from a talk I was at last week. But again, we're trying to be on the leading edge. So we're trying to listen to industry, respond to your concerns, and our policy, at least from a policy perspective, we're among the leaders out there. There's, again, about 10 to 12 universities that have gone this direction. We've all said we're getting back together again at this conference in 2 years to talk about 2 things. One, have we had success? Has it worked? Has it driven increased research and better relationships? And the second one is, what are the unintended consequences? Because again, we're all jumping into fairly new territory. We don't know what those unintended consequences are, but there will be some. That's not a bad thing, it's just a thing. And when we have them, we'll have to figure out how are we going to tweak and modify to make sure that those don't have a negative impact. So the other thing I wanted to tell you about, again, is our proof of concept initiative. This is money that we get annually from the legislature. And it came at a time when we had just had 60% budget cuts from the legislature in our economic development funds. Then they started to restore some funds, but they restored it with the mandate of, don't just backfill what we cut. We want you to do something different. And so the different that we came up with was a cost-sharing program where we would fund projects that showed commercial promise and with matching funds. So only again, we can be creative with the matching funds. If Pioneer comes to us and wants to use this program, we're going to ask you to match with cash because you're a big company. If a startup company that only has 3 people and no money comes, we're going to get creative and figure out how we can do some in-kind matching. And in fact, it's been the startup companies where we've shown a lot of success, and we've launched something like 26 companies in the past 8 years by using this program. Those numbers don't always show up in the statistics because when we do the official statistics, there are certain rules on what counts as a startup, and that includes they have to have a license from Iowa State. And remember when I said that it's only a small portion of our research that leads to patents? Well, most of our startups aren't based on patents. They're based on ideas and know-how and things that came out of the research, but not a patent. So about 26 companies have formed out of this. It's a great program. It's really hard to apply for, too. It's 2 pages. The application is 2 whole pages. Believe me, some professors have struggled with that. They'll send in their long proposal and then they're in shock because we will email it back to them and say, no, 2 pages. You have to follow the rules. Because we also engage the business community in the review of those proposals. And we want to make sure that we don't make you read these really long proposals. So we accept applications at any time. You have to partner a company and an Iowa State professor. The research is done at Iowa State. We do have some capacity to subcontract some of the funds back to the company, but most of it has to be done at Iowa State. Again, there's a 1-to-1 match required, but depending on company size, we'll work with you on what's appropriate for that. The application's 2 pages. We review it within, we try to review it within 2 weeks of receiving it. I think we're about 80% of the time we get that. And you know the same day as the review whether you're getting funded or not. So again, it's another one where we're trying to be more responsive, move more quickly. But we're always looking for new companies because we tend to get the same ones coming back to the well again and again because they know the program. So we're trying to do a better job of getting that word out so that more of you know you can take advantage of this. So with that, that's kind of what's going on at Iowa State, what we've been doing to try to be more engaging with industry, be more friendly, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, or if you have suggestions too. We're always open to all of that.
The POCI program, and is there rules about who is responsible for writing the checks, who dictates what gets paid for, what the mechanism for using the money from the grant to do the work?
So you find an Iowa State professor. They know all the budgeting rules at Iowa State. So you would work with them to come up with a work plan and a budget. Now let's say we're subcontracting $20,000 back to your company. You would have to follow our same spending rules because it's actually an Iowa State account that gets created for you, and then you submit expenses and get reimbursed out of that. So we have to follow all the state. You can't go buy a new car, but if it's anything related to research, travel.
And then is there some, there's a budget, a plan,
Yeah.
and then is there some oversight on the cash outlays, and then according to what the budget was? Or
Yes. Yeah. So you do that budget, and then the Iowa State accounting people compare your expenses, make sure they line up with the budget.
Got it.
I forgot to mention, it's usually $50,000 increments. So a project can be up to 2 phases of $50,000 each. We used to do all of it up front, but believe it or not, we had a terrible time getting people to spend their money. And so we got tired of, at the end of our fiscal year, spending the last 2 months on the phone begging people to please spend their money. So we switched to $50,000, 6 to 8 month project. At the end, we'll invite people back in to tell us, did they do what they say they were going to do, and what's the next steps, and then we dole out the second phase. Quiet group.
What percent of the opportunities that you initially look at actually end up being funded?
So I'm going to answer it 2 ways. With federal proposals, there's a less than 10% success rate. So for every 10 proposals that go in for the federal government, we're lucky if we get 1. Industry, it's a little harder to know because typically the faculty won't put it in the system until we've already agreed that we want to do this project. We've probably already got our work plan worked out. We may have our budget already worked out, and then they put it in the system. So it's more than 95% of the ones that we see actually move forward. But I don't know how many never get to us. We do about 300 projects, research projects a year with industry. I think that number has actually fallen off in the last decade, but the amount of money has increased. So we used to do a couple hundred projects, less than $10,000 each every year, and those seem to have trailed off, and the bigger projects are picking up.
How would the volume of companies that are working at Iowa State compare to some of the other universities who do a good job? I'm doing a lot of peer analysis. Do you think we're doing well in relation to peers?
If you look at it from a percentage-wise.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, repeat the question, sorry. How do we compare to our peers as far as the work that we do with industry? When you look at it from a raw numbers, it all depends. Because I did bioinformatics in my former life, so I'm kind of a data nerd. So I could pull my data up for the next hour and bore you with how much I've looked at this. It depends on how you slice and dice it. If you compare us to other universities and states that are similarly sized to us, we do really, really well. If you compare us to medical schools, or universities that have medical schools, we do terrible. But that's because the clinical trials dominate everything. So if you filter out medical schools and schools like Purdue was on that comparison I had, they're huge compared to us. So the raw volume of industry funding that they do is at least 3 times what we do. But on a percentage basis, we're in the ballpark. We're pretty comparable, we're pretty good. We do about 17 to 20 million of pure research with industry. Now when you see a lot of the numbers in the papers, they'll mix in scholarship support, research support, building support, all lumped into one number. I pull all that out and I just look at research.
You have a project that come up with, and you don't know anybody in a particular department at Iowa State, but you feel that would be the department that you'd want to work with. how do you get in touch with them? You don't know anybody up there, just what's the route?
The route is perfect. We've got, Mike Crum has been hiring people to fulfill that role. Right now we have one person, Chris Johansson, who's helping to act in that industry liaison connector role. But really, if you know anybody in any of that alphabet soup, or anybody at Iowa State, let them know and we can help connect you.
Okay.
So we're trying to have many doors that can lead you to the right place. A lot of people will come in through Cirrus, or Hyper Company Assistance, or in our community group, an extension. Or if you have a friend, I mean, people find us in various ways, but just don't be afraid to ask.
Now they have your contact information.
Yes, so you can get a hold of me.
Uh,
I forgot my business card, so
If you mentioned this already, I apologize, I talked to Mike, but any projects in particular you're proud of that have gone through the system, particularly under this new regime, kind of poster children, get a sense of what's going on?
yeah, I don't think the company, I have to be careful. We've got a company in the back of the room that's Kemen that has used these flexible solutions, and I think we've both been pretty happy with the outcome of that.
We are trying to sell it to universities nationally.
And just in full disclosure, we struggled with our relationship with Kemen for years. I mean, finding that right balance. And when we finally came up with this, I think in the last 5 years, it's been a wonderful relationship because we finally found out how to address each other's concerns. Another one that I find interesting is Deere. We have a master agreement with Deere. So, fill out the paperwork, implement it, it's fine. But there's one group within Deere that the minute we came out with this, they said, oh, yeah, we want to do that. And so we renegotiated our master so that there's the choice every time. And this one group within Deere, every time chooses option B. It's just, they don't even discuss it. That's standard for that group. There's another group that thinks that their sister group is crazy. Why would they spend an extra 10%? And they don't want to do that. They use the traditional option. And that's fine. But I think, every company will evolve to what's right for them.
I think it would be helpful if there were some success stories that were with permission of contracting parties out there and understood by the industry.
Yeah, that's the challenge. Yep.
How are the faculty responding?
So how are the faculty responding? Great. I think the faculty, first and foremost, want research money. And then they do want recognition for the work that they've done. So that's why in our policies, we've always tried to preserve that recognition and some type of a reward for them for doing this. But I have not had any faculty member not want to use the flexible solutions. Now, some of those other universities that I mentioned, I was just at a meeting last week, they are having some issues with that. They've had wholesale departments and colleges say they want to opt out.
Are these land grants or something?
It's harder in a medical school because those medical technologies can be more valuable. And so it's harder, I think it's harder in a medical school to get the faculty to say, I'm going to accept 10% as my feedback.
What's the bonanza clause?
The bonanza clause, that's the 1% if there's an annual $20 million
Okay.
of added value. And we've had to get very creative on that added value. Some projects, some of them don't lend themselves well, but we've always figured it out.
I came in a little late, so I apologize, but could you just give like a minute of that probably opening 5 minutes that you did about why, you're working as hard as you're doing, your people trying to be flexible, and what the overall goals are, and a little bit of that kind of description?
Well, I think I've been at Iowa State 15 years, and through much of that, we had a reputation of being difficult to work with, which I quite frankly had a terrible time understanding because we've been over backwards every time we were asked. But what we did a terrible job of was formalizing how we would bend and telling people that we could bend. But it was really when President Lee came and started that conversation about we want to be friendly to work with, we want to be easy to work with, we want to engage more. It kind of opened our eyes and went, oh, well, this is our problem. We gotta tell people what we can do. We can't just keep it inside and trust that they'll think we're good people. So that's my 30-second. And I think in his leadership has really helped. It's really gotten a lot of companies willing to come back and talk to us again and re-engage. And I'm sure there are things that don't always go perfectly, but I know most of them that have come back and re-engaged, it's been a good relationship. Anything else? Well, if not, I want to thank you again for taking your time out of your busy schedules and walking through the snow and cold.
You gonna stick around for a little?
Oh yeah, I'll be here.